Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy Podcast. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy Podcast is brought to you in part by Florida Internet and Television. It's time to cut the tax on tech. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Joshua Schachter, investor and founder of Self-Racing Cars. Welcome to the podcast, Joshua.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going great. You've had your hand and fingers on the pulse of innovation and trends that will impact society for a long time. What are some of the new trends that you're starting to see emerge?
I never have a great answer for this. I've been angel investing for 15 years now, right when I sold my first company in end of 2005. I've invested in about 200 plus startups. And it's always weird because, I have sort of three kinds of investments. The educational deal, and I'm not talking about literally education. It's where I'm being educated in, this is interesting. I think this could be big. I'm going to place a bet and sort of see how it feels over time. And maybe I like this sector, maybe I don't. I'll learn a bunch. I had invested in a satellite communications company, and I was talking to a friend who had been horribly burned in satellite communications. And he said, why in the world would you invest in this? And I'm like, well, I like the team. I like the idea. I like the business model. I've never done this before. So I guess what I'm going to learn is how I lose money in satellite communications. And actually, they're doing fine 10 years on. So that's good. The second type is the intellectual deal, which is I know the business, I know the sector, I know what they're doing, and I like it. So I invest. And then the third is what I'll call the emotional deal, which is the gut intuition, where I meet somebody and they talk about what they're doing, and I'm like, yes, I want this deal. This is great. I need this. And this is, out of the 200 plus companies, this has probably happened 6, 7, 8 times, but 5 of those have IPOed. And that's sort of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for stuff that is sort of outside the mold. So trying to understand what the general trends are is important, but every company that succeeds is sort of out of pattern somehow, right? Because the general pattern for tech startups is to fail, right? 80% of what I invest in, I think it's roughly a third or maybe more than that, go out of business outright. A third, they do okay, or they get acquired for a 1x return. I get my dollars back, or they continue to trundle along. And then a third have, more return. So figuring out what's in the air is a little different than what the trend is. By the time people have identified trends, it's a little bit lagging. So I don't worry about it too much. Right now, looking at what people talk about, it's fintech. Everybody's into fintech. And it's weird because I worked in finance for a decade. I was on Wall Street, but it doesn't resonate particularly strongly with me. I do like marketplaces, so it's a near neighbor. It can be really tough to follow those things sometimes.
Well, fintech might be trendy now. You found Square and got in there years ago before fintech became trendy. How did you first find Square and develop that relationship to eventually invest?
So my first startup was a company called Delicious. It allowed people to save a URL and organize it using tags. And I invented tags as part of that. And I was sort of a big voice in the Web 2.0 era. And I ended up with relationships with a bunch of people who were doing stuff. One of those was, I went when the entire Twitter company was a bunch of people in one room, and I went and talked with them and helped them a bit and so on. And so I knew Jack from that. And then a few years later, he left Twitter to do Square, and he showed me what they were working on. And I ended up getting to write a small check-in early on. Unfortunately, a lot of it is, right place, right time kind of stuff. So I was lucky.
Luck plays a big role in life, and success makes people successful. But One of the main things in life is your reputation and relationships, and you've really done a really good job of developing and nurturing relationships. Would you say combining your relationships with your gut instinct is how you've had some of your most successful exits on your investments?
So reputation is definitely important. I will absolutely take it on the chin to make sure the founder is not screwed over. Partially because I've seen it happen a couple of times, both as an investor and as a founder. I mean, gut instinct is hard to reason about because it's very easy to get into loops where you second guess yourself. I find myself looking at a deal that I'm on the fence on, and then I sort of imagine that I've already written the check and try to feel if my inner regret sense goes off. Like, am I regretting investing in this already? I think the problem is that your gut sense is sort of nonverbal, and talking to it is very hard. I mean, one of the reasons I run self-racing cars is because I wanted to build relationships in a sector where I didn't have any, right? I'm well connected in Silicon Valley and web tech, and automotive and autonomy is just a thing that I love, right? So that's a sort of specific version of that, if that makes any sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And so you invented self-racing cars to build and nurture these relationships. When did you first become interested in autonomy and autonomous vehicles?
My degree is in electrical engineering. I always figured I'd go into CPU design when I was in college in the mid 90s when I graduated, and that didn't work out because I did one job interview and it was pretty boring. Like I said, I went onto Wall Street, but it was almost that robots were too hard. Like that stuff that the smart kids did, the really crazy stuff. So I've always been fascinated by robots, and I now that I have time to learn how to do this stuff, I've built a bunch of machines. But at the same time, I also like automotive. Since I got to California, 10 years in, I actually learned how to drive a race car, and I race in an amateur league. So I like robots, I like cars. So that's autonomy, right? But I also knew that I was never ever going to build an autonomous vehicle. Like I just don't have the skill or the energy anymore. So I wanted to be involved, and I figured I would start an event where people could basically show what they have. And it's not a super serious competition. Like bring what you have, and we rented the racetrack here. So we should probably talk about what self-racing cars is, just so for context, which is I rent out a track about 3 hours north of San Francisco, which is a great deal cheaper. And for a weekend, a bunch of people get together and we let them take their vehicle, whatever it is. It's from an RC car, a Prius, whatever they have set up, and let them try to get around the track autonomously.
The one individual who seemingly every year has the fastest lap time is Aaron Nathan and the team at Point One Navigation. How are they always having the fastest autonomous lap?
I think Kama was only like a second slower. They have a bunch of experience. Aaron came out of DARPA's Grand Challenge in his history. They're smart and they're building a good thing. But the other key is that they actually race. Their co-founder actually, knows. So in racing, there's something called the line on track, which is mathematically it's the set of turns so that you turn the wheel the least. The more you turn the wheel, the slower the car goes. So, and that sounds like a very academic thing, but you actually have to feel it. But the car can go much faster depending on where you put it, where its path is. They have a combination of skill and understanding.
The skill and understanding is incredible when you put the helmet on and you go in that car, you understand it. But you actually took me for a ride around the track when a human driven. Boy, oh boy, did you hit that line. That was fun.
How long did I take you in the little Miata or the big car?
We went in the little Miata. You scared the living crap out of me, but it was fun.
That car has something like, only 2/3 the power of what the autonomous teams were using, right? The Miata only has like 110 horsepower, right? This is a 92 little junker car, but I'm also, 30 seconds a lap faster than them. It's simply because of practice and knowing where the line is. And I'm not even like good, right? So anyway, I feel that engineering really happens on the limit. When you push the weird edges, or you discover new dimensions of what's feasible that no one had realized previously, and then push that. And that's sort of what I want to see. I want to see what's possible, because that will inform what's probable.
You're learning a lot because at these events, and individuals are coming out and teams are coming out and testing new technologies and pushing it to limit to see what's possible. As you scale self-racing cars and we go into a post-pandemic world, how do you not lose that incredible homebrew club? For instance, you're 1 minute you're talking to this founder, then you're talking to that founder, and they're showing you your tech. How do you keep that incredible homebrew feel as you scale the event as it gets larger over the years?
I really hope that this someday we resume face-to-face interaction. I mean, I'm okay with this being careful. I mean, obviously, I'm okay. I don't have much of a choice, but I will deal with it as long as I need to. But someday, I would like to go to parties and events and things in person. So I'm not quite sure. I do see a lot of startups that are doing happy hours, socializing over Zoom. Doesn't feel very right. I have not really thrilled with any of those products.
I totally agree with you because you're not building that intimacy of a relationship. You're not going up to the bar or going to another room and then bumping into a founder that could go on to something. And at these events and meetups, have you gone on to meet a founder that has gone on to have a very successful exit for you just out of happenstance from being in that room at that time?
Absolutely. I mean, when I go to conferences, so I do go to TED, for example. I don't go to the sessions at all. I spend the entire week in the hallway talking to people, one on one. Who knows who? What's going on? Let's go meet so and so. This is cool. Nice to meet you, etc. I have a friend who runs a conference that is named after the lobby, right, where everybody chats, right, and the sessions are minimal. The interstitial spaces are where the value happens for this stuff, right? Conferences are and things like it are really important because they let you escape sameness, right? So it's not so far away that the people that you meet have no context with which to talk to you about. There's a good chance you're 1, 2, 3 hops away, or you're involved in a similar thing. And it's not just like hoity-toity stuff like TED. Like for example, I'm in Santa Clara in California, in Silicon Valley. Like there's the Sensors Expo. I'm hoping to go to the international I like manufacturing a lot also. The International Manufacturing Conference, I think in Chicago, because I like CNC machines, which is, more robots. I want to go see that, that kind of stuff. Gatherings of people that are doing interesting stuff. You can go and float around and get, pick up what's on the breeze.
You're 100% right about the hallways. I'm the same with you. When you go to these conferences, I never really go in. I hang out in the hallways because you meet people.
I mean, you'll notice at self-racing cars, there's no sessions.
Nope, it's awesome.
And I try and put all the food and stuff is in the same place. I know it does feel haphazard, but it's at least partially thought about.
Haphazard is I would say is a rude and wrong word to clarify that. It's done on purpose because you're forced to be in that room. You had that incredible remote operation in that room, and then you had the gentleman that was working on the braking thing, and then you bump into this person and they're operating that. It was just this brilliant way that everybody had to come into that room, and then you had to sign the waiver to get your helmet. I mean, it was extremely well done, and let's hope that can continue because just the people that you meet at self-racing cars is awesome. And you look at self-racing cars as this incredible little event of like-minded individuals who really care about racing and care about autonomy and want to learn. And then in the current state of the world, we really can't get together face-to-face. But then on Wall Street, we got a bullish market. We've got the IPOs of DoorDash and Airbnb coming. We recently had Luminar and Velodyne SPACs. So that market's doing really well. But we don't really hear a lot about the private venture capital market. How's that market doing as relations to Wall Street?
Well, remember, it's not a market in the same way. It's not like it's a liquid thing. It's a much more slowly moving system. I think venture goes through waves of contraction and relaxation, a sort of peristalsis. Like I said, fintech is the in the air, with Stripe hitting a $70 billion valuation. That's one of my big misses, unfortunately. I don't know. I mean, I'm very focused on seed stage, right? So I'm looking for companies that have a valuation under 10 or 12 million dollars total valuation, market cap or whatever. Typically when they go out, if a company like that has a big exit, I think my first decent exit, it was 9 years between the investment and the return. If I had dumped everything, there was another 15x after the IPO that took another 6 years, I think. Right. So my viewpoint has to be what's hot today is not incredibly important, other than it does guide what a lot of startups are being started. Like I said, fintech is a rough biz. And I think that there's just not that many interesting ones. We're so deep below the surface of the ocean that the hurricane up top doesn't even make a ripple below. So, although there is the theory that sort of any startup that touches money eventually has to become fintech/fraud detection, right? Anything that touches consumer money. If you make a company that buys and sells sneakers, which is a big deal, people are going to try and defraud you, and that's the edges of fintech right there.
Yeah, you're seeing it today. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how these organized crime units are trying to hijack the vaccine shipments and then put it into their own little thing. So you're always going to have a criminal element, and it's always this cat and mouse game of who can stay ahead of who. When you're looking at the different stages of investment, you clearly stated that you play in the seed stage, and it seems to me that a fair analogy would be you have to have a lot of patience to play in that space. Is anything kind of bubbled up during this pandemic in the seed stage where you've been completely blown away by it?
In terms of the idea, the tech.
In terms of, like, has there a company started to emerge? Has there been any ideas that people are starting to really focus on stuff? I know you said fintech, but is there anything else bubbling up in the seed stage that's starting to become of interest?
I'm seeing a ton of these how to have conferences, how to do meetings, audio, video focused around video conferencing, one to one to many, all that stuff. And I think that will go somewhere. I think gaming is probably taking off just in terms of volume. I haven't seen a lot of change, but I think it'll emerge. Although I still don't think AR, VR, XR is the right thing yet. Nobody's running. People are running out to buy PlayStations, but not VR headsets. Probably because the content is not particularly compelling. So what happens is that I think that there are, the founders are looking to start something that's different, differentiated. How is it different from everything else in the market? And what happens is they find a little bit of difference, right? They walk to the edge of the known world and they plant their foot. They plant their flag rather, and they like, here it is, one toe into the unknown. They plant their flag and this is us. This is our crazy new startup. And it's just not different enough. They can't articulate why it's different, or the tech is different, but nobody wants it. And I'm much more interested in the startup that went right off the map, super weird. And then now they're like, okay, well, we need to drag this back to reality so that other people will know what we're talking about, right? And then they come, from the perspective of, with regard to the known world, they're very alien, and they look back to the rest of the world. They're focused on it from a different direction, right? A change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points, right? So
That's a really good point, because if you look at a lot of the stuff, is the herd mentality. Well, you said fintech, and another hot industry is electric vehicles. Oh, I got to do an electric vehicle startup, and it just seems for years now, it's just seemed like every month there's a new EV startup. When does that bubble burst? Because there's too many, and it's too much of a cash intensive business for everybody to survive.
the way I try to think about stuff like that, so, and that's closer to my heart, which is how do you invest in technological innovation? And there's lots of startups they have an idea, but the idea is research, right? Will this idea work? you go from research to development, the idea works. I think this is a working idea. Now we're going to develop it as a product, right? Can it be scaled in cost? And then from the development to commercialization. And each of those have different valuation inflection points. And one of the problems is that research stage startups need the same sort of capital as later, except you don't even know if the thing is even going to work. So, and not only that, but how much money you've put in doesn't tell you anything about how much more money to go before it hits development. So, hopefully, you're catching something that came out of a lab. It's tough to figure out where to invest.
Is that where George Hotz and Comma AI, is that the path that they're following? Was this more of George had an idea that I can hack this thing together and do it and prove it, and then he's kind of scaled it up and now into the...
Good comparison. So there's another spectrum, which I'll call enabling to enabled technologies. You can't build EVs without the battery tech, right? The battery tech is enabling, EVs are enabled. And sometimes you see companies straddling that, like Tesla. A lot of their innovation is the battery packaging management and technology, right? That's what makes those cars feasible. The fact that they make the seats or whatever is weird and irrelevant, right? So George did not have to invent neural networks to do that. So he's an enabled technology. And one thing I struggle with is that in some industries, enabled technologies are the valuable ones. And sometimes the enabling technologies are the valuable ones. So when communications networks, if there was no broadband, you wouldn't have YouTube. YouTube is enabled by, they get a lot of value from being YouTube, they're from having that. Some industries, the enabling technology, the owner of the enabling technology sucks all the air out of the room for everybody else, right? And usually what happens is that causes a sort of latent pressure in another dimension that causes that value to pop up somewhere else. So, for example, the phone companies felt that all revenue of things on phones belonged to them for a long time. And finally, remember that Apple had to break that stranglehold for apps back in the day. If you remember the original iPhone, you saw WhatsApp acquired for $20 billion, probably because SMS, people liked that because it was cheaper than SMS, right? Because the phone companies wanted to charge per text.
I love the Apple iPhone analogy and the text message analogy with the phone companies, because the big telcos, yeah, you'd have the pre-installed app, and then don't forget, a lot of listeners remember, you couldn't delete it. And it was all these things, and then all the different Nokia phones, all the different chargers, and Apple just came in and they simplified it. And then the biggest brilliance in the whole thing when Steve Jobs was still alive was the all-you-could-eat $99 unlimited plan. That was like the biggest game-changing moment for me. It wasn't necessarily the phone. It was the fact that instead of the telco charging for everything, $99. You don't like it? We're going to the next person. That was brilliant.
It had a bunch of market deforming dynamics, right? A smaller piece of a bigger pie is great. That goes back to a couple of points ago. That's the sort of thing I'm looking for in the startup is it going to deform the way the marketplace works currently? If it doesn't, like if I see a startup and there's always for early stage startups, sometimes they're smart enough to not have the 5-year waterfall and TAM slide. But if they have an easy to TAM is the total addressable market. If they have an easy to articulate value on TAM, like I remember when, so I invested in Etsy at its seed stage, and they did not bother having a TAM slide because what is the addressable market? Like who knows what the addressable market of hobbyist made stuff at the time, right? Who knows? But your question was, about scaling EVs. I do think that there are a bunch of enabling technologies yet to be unlocked. So I pay a lot of attention to battery tech and motor tech, because any incremental improvements of any reasonable size in those dimensions are going to unlock tremendous value in the marketplace. And just, I don't want to annoy the Tesla religious, but the chances of us having achieved the perfect implementation of any given technology is vanishingly unlikely. So there will be technologies that are better than what we have now, and the question is who will invent them. Obviously, Tesla is well placed because they have expertise at scale, expertise and execution at scale, and very few others do.
They do, and Tesla has a brand. I mean, that's the other aspect of it. It's a brand.
And brands are astonishingly difficult to put together.
Yeah, and it's just an incredible thing. Some people call it the cult of Elon. There's all these different terms you want, but he's built a brand. He was there on the cutting edge when multiple people called it a fraud and all these different things, and then he just keeps producing and producing, and the brand keeps growing despite all the people putting hatchets in it, trying to tear him down. He just keeps on going.
Yeah, it is really amazing, and you know, I drive one, you know, so there's the proof is in the pudding.
And then on the other side of the EV world, you have Rivians. To me, they're not going to become a consumer brand. At some point, they're going to have to make a big pivot into the commercialization with the skateboard technology. You got the 100,000 order from Amazon. What is your take on Rivian? Does that technology then scale into Ford? Originally was going to put in the Lincoln. That was discontinued. Does that technology, do they just license that skateboard? They become a Continental, a Bosch, a big supplier?
I mean, I think that there is an enormous gravitational pull in automotive for organizational demands to structure the product. Many companies ship their organization, right? The organization is formed to make products in a certain way, but ultimately the products are formed in a certain way because the organization is shaped the way it is. If you've ever done a group project in like school or something, the project, if there's 4 team members, the project has 4 parts because it's just the way we work, right? Car companies like to componentize all their stuff, and they work together in a certain way at arm's length. So maybe that will force Rivian to structure their stuff in that particular way. I mean, that is one of the interesting things about Tesla is that they are less beholden to that because of their organizational architecture. The question is, and I don't really follow it, so I don't know anything about it. I don't know what Rivian has in terms of fundamental enabling technology differential. I'm sure there is something, but I just don't know what it is.
The one thing that we know what it is, which is publicly available, is that there's billions upon billions of dollars. But what's behind that from the technology?
If only dollars made things real, that would be great, but it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way, and a lot of these companies in the autonomous vehicle space are learning it the hard way. Uber's ATG, with the billions of dollars invested, has not had a successful run, and now they're actively shopping the company. Toyota's got $1 billion invested in there. Does Toyota just step in and say, okay, let's cut our losses, buy it, and merge it into TRI and try and salvage that investment?
I think Toyota are extremely savvy operators. I mean, I think that they are very much figuring out what can be implemented safely, working, reliable, and ship it. The question is, and we don't have the viewpoint to understand this, what is inside that box? What is inside ATG? Is it a bunch of great developers? Again, if you are shipping your org, what does that org look like? The shape of that org, maybe cutting it up and taking out pieces is the right way to do it, just to not have that org be that shape anymore. You can have teams where everyone on the team individually is great, but the morale is low. The way they work together is poor. I've seen it. We don't know anything. It could be great. It could be poor. Who knows what's going on there? I mean, I always thought it was weird that Uber had to have a piece of this because the fundamental assumption is that if Uber didn't get autonomy on its own, and if someone else owned it entirely, they would be priced out. So the question is the entire margin of what would be returned by their entire margin of their main product, would that be entirely consumed by the demands of whoever had autonomy? And I just didn't really believe that. Like I just never saw that there'd be only one kind of one autonomy company that owned everything soup to nuts, right? Top to bottom. So it started from what I think is a unrealistic assumption. I just don't know where it goes from there. So, I'm not sure.
Because Uber's interesting. It's just they made a lot of stumbles along the way. I've always made the argument when they had, before Masa decided to become the NASDAQ whale, and you got the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, you got SoftBank, and you have these large investors in there. Volvo was for sale, and don't forget that. I always made the argument they should, if they're going to do this program, go in and buy Volvo and rebrand ATG Volvo because it has a consumer thing around trust. But instead, they went and bought Auto, and we saw where that happened. And who knows how large that legal bill is, and still ongoing from that. But it's refreshing now to see, okay, Uber's getting back to its core business of being a platform and not trying to be the everything company. There's only one everything company. It's Amazon. It's everything that you want it to be. And you're seeing that.
I can't get a ride from Amazon yet, I guess.
Soon. It's coming with the Zoox acquisition. That's a really great point. What are your thoughts on the Zoox acquisition? They stole it. I mean, they got such a great bargain price for it. I'm hearing that Aurora is being shopped for $7 billion now, and Amazon paid about 1.2 billion for Zoox. They scooped it up. What are your thoughts on that transaction?
Zoox is a little weird. I've heard a lot of stories about, again, what happened organizationally, but I don't know much about their technology. And I do remember that Zoox was also decided they had to build their own vehicle. And again, this stuff stresses me out. Again, I think about everything from the early stage startup point of view, which is, look, you need to get one product to market that people want or you will die. So anyone that's doing 7 things and they're all somehow interdependent, or worse, 7 things and 3 of them aren't things you actually need to do, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that you needed to build a new vehicle to go with autonomy. Could it have been plain old vehicles? I mean, humans seem to do okay with them, right? They're fine, I think. That would be a good question next time I talk to one of the big safety guys. Is, I know we do incremental changes to vehicles every year, but is there some major thing that we could do to cars? Could we add like 2 more wheels? Would that help a lot? Or whatever, or some crazy, very different architecture. Anyway, the question is, I don't know what's there. I think Amazon is extremely savvy, and if they offered X and they were acquired for X, we're probably worth X, right? If there were no other acquirers on the table, etc. So I'm not sure I would. X was a steal. I'm not sure I believe that.
I've been in several generations of the vehicle, both on the test track and around San Francisco. It performed exceptionally well comparing to what they paid and what the talent you got for. I think it was a brilliant acquisition, because Amazon at some point is going to do the Prime Mobility tier. That's when it becomes really interesting. For X dollars a year, in these cities, you can get unlimited rides in a Zoox mobile. It becomes very sticky. It becomes part of your shopping's included, your shipping's included, your Prime Video's included. Oh, wait a second, now I got a mobility included. It's absolutely brilliant. And they're one of the few companies that can pull it off. The other big one is when, if Project Titan ever comes to life, is that Apple's incredible Trojan horse in this is the Apple Store. You can send a grandparent or an older individual to the Apple Store. They trust the Genius Bar. They can teach them about the vehicle and how to operate it and how it's going to work autonomously. That's a brilliant model, because the infrastructure for the store is already built out, and Apple's already built the trust with those older demographics who are more likely to use the service in the early days.
That's one of the reasons I invested in Voyage. That same idea of mobility for the mobility challenged. I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy is car guys are like, I hate electric cars. I'm never going to, what's the point of a car driving itself? That's no fun. I'm like, there are millions of people who are unable to drive themselves and need to get from point A to point B. And boo-hoo, you don't get the sound of your V8 or whatever. Like I have limited sympathy, because lots of people are in hell for a variety of reasons. They can't drive. They have no one to drive them. I think that there's a tremendous unlocking yet to happen.
You're 100% right. Late last year, Oliver and I went over to the Villages here in Florida. And
Oliver being the CEO of
Oliver
Voyager.
Cameron, yep, being the CEO of Voyage, and took me over there and took me for a ride. And you should have seen the amount of people that came up to the vehicle. When can I get this? Can this take me here? Can this take me there? How do I sign up to get on the waiting list? How do I get into your early rider program? The general excitement from those individuals in the Villages is something when you're there on the ground, you experience it, you're like, wow, okay, there's something truly here. And people say weird things about Voyage, but they're going to be one of the successful ones because they have a niche market, and it goes into my whole theory of there's riches in niches because they have disposable income. They like to party, they like to drink, and they don't like to drive. Well, here's a service that can allow you to live your life and put your golf clubs in and go to your bar and have a good old time. It's brilliant. And he has pricing power on it on top of it. When you look at the rest of the industry, to me, there's no pricing power. You're going to be in a race to zero because everybody wants to operate in San Francisco and major metropolitan regions. Building upon that, what are your thoughts on the current state of the autonomous vehicle market?
I mean, there is none, right? It doesn't exist currently. In terms of the marketplace, like what people are actually using, right? There's precious little versus the equities, the companies. I still think that I think it's just very far away in terms of regulation, in terms of implementation, in terms of safety, in terms of social acceptance. It's hard to seeing it, suddenly resolved in the next year or two.
That's a valid point because we have a new incoming administration. There is no AV Start Act, so you legally can't drive an AV over state lines. Sometimes you can't even go over county lines. We have not achieved a general acceptance in society. And what's going to happen when as we work towards these goals where companies run out of money, they merge and consolidation begins? Who do you think is going to be the big winners? Is it the companies with the balance sheets that can just hold on and ride this out, or do you think is going to be the winners in the end?
I think that's true. I think it's people that have the longevity to get there. This is one of the things that also probably scares capital away, right? This is why biotech startups have so much trouble raising, is the regulatory hurdles. I think what's going to happen is that if the regulatory burden is too high, autonomy will happen in some country that is more amenable to this kind of thing. And then we'll end up sort of behind, or, well, it works in wherever. Okay, I guess it's probably okay. We'll get the numbers, but it's possible that the innovation will have followed. If the only reasonable autonomy market is China, that will play havoc with the ability of American companies to compete because they'll have to be there for testing and scale.
Then you raise the national security issue, which is starting to brew. We had a podcast with Oliver Ramos, and he was talking about in Europe, there's national security issues with some of these companies coming there. And you're going to have them here. The National Intelligence Director in the Wall Street Journal wrote a big op-ed today on China national security. So that's going to become a really big issue that nobody's talking about, is where the technology developed and what's going to happen with the new administration. It's all these political elements. So when I put my investment hat on, I look at all the political risks as well. And a lot of companies just think that this is the Wild West. It's not the Wild West. You have to be prepared for a mountain of avalanches, and you have to figure out how can you survive those. And you have to look for changes in political climates.
It does not help that one of the big players killed someone through inattentiveness already in a very press visible way, right? So that is not good for the industry, right? So one of the points that people have said is that, and this makes it an especially challenging thing, is that you can't really do level 3 where a human has to be paying attention and prepared to take over all the time. That doesn't actually work, just given the way human attention spans, you know what I mean? So lots of things are able to switch in gradually, right? Like we talked about the iPhone. The iPhone didn't require a day zero where everybody switched, right? It's just people switched to the new phone when they felt like it. And the advantages were lots and the disadvantages were few, and it's fine, right? So we don't have that for autonomy, right? We can't get there. We can't gradually arrive. We have to transition. it's like a light switch for stage level 4 autonomy, right? So I think it's going to be a rough transition.
It's going to be, I don't necessarily know it's going to be, I would use the word interesting. And the other thing that you mentioned, about the unfortunate incident in Arizona is that you take that, you combine that with a pro-labor administration. Boy, oh boy, the next 4 years of this industry are going to be extremely tough because there's not enough politically savvy people in this industry that understand politics and how to navigate this, to buy time to perfect the technology, because you're going to see a rush for revenue, but it's not ready for revenue.
I think that 4 years is probably the low end of the believable horizon for rollout anyway. I don't think we're going to see large scale autonomy in 4 years anyway.
No, we're going to see it in little pockets. They'll start operating in pockets. Like Oliver will operate Voyage in the villages. Waymo will continue to operate in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and there'll be something probably in Miami and San Francisco. And the industry is merely just in its infancy. And Joshua, as we look to wrap up this extremely insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
I think that the thing to look at, again, I always try to find the new. What is the new thing? What's changing? What's in the air? What's next? That's sort of what I think about. So that's what they should look for and try to think about and understand. What's the next thing we're going to see? We're always building the preconditions for the future, but how do we actively figure out how to make it arrive?
That's a brilliant way to wrap up this conversation. Always be on the lookout for the next thing, because the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future's investable. Joshua, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on the Road to Autonomy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.